7th of September, 12th Sunday in Trinity. Sermon on Jeremiah 18 verses 1 to 11 and Psalm 139 verses 1 to 18. In our two Bible passages today, we see two faces of the Lord which at first glance seem incompatible, contradictory, confusing. That cannot be right. Our God is constant, trustworthy, reliable. So we'll unpack each of these readings in turn, consider what they're saying, and then see if they can in some way be reconciled, presenting a consistent picture of the God whom we believe to be loving and gracious. We'll begin with Psalm 139, written by King David about 1,000 years before Christ. David became king after a long period of waiting, during which he often had to run for his life from King Saul. Although anointed by God, he didn't become king of Israel for many years and had to trust implicitly in the Lord. This psalm might have been written once David attained his kingdom and established peace. But it could just as well have been penned when his life was in danger and he was a fugitive, for in all circumstances his trust in God was complete. In these verses, David marvels at the way in which the Lord knows him intimately, having searched him through and through. If the Lord knew David in such a complete way, he would be familiar with both his strengths and failures, his negative thoughts and selfish actions. But David displays no anxiety. He can trust his Lord to understand his frailty as well as his virtues. David is aware of the Lord being with him in all he does, laying his hand upon him, hemming him in behind and before. That might sound negative to us, but David appreciates God's guidance and protection. It is knowledge too wonderful for him. He is aware that there's no escape from God. Wherever he goes, even to the heavens or the depths, God will be there before him. If he rises on the wings of the dawn and travels to the furthest oceans, he will find God's hand reaching for him. Darkness itself cannot conceal him from the Lord. David doesn't find this degree of surveillance oppressive. On the contrary, he rejoices that the Lord can make the darkness of his hiding place shine like the day. David recalls that the Lord would have seen him even before he was born, while he was concealed in his mother's womb, and he acknowledges the miracle of conception and birth. In language that we might find bloodthirsty, David calls on the Lord to avenge him, to protect him from evil men. He allows himself to hate those who hate God. We have to remember that at that time God was establishing a nation and a kingdom that was to mirror his heavenly kingdom, and that was to bring forth a Messiah to provide salvation for all people. Nothing was to stand in his way. Our salvation depended on the survival of that earthly kingdom over which David ruled. In these verses we see David completely trusting himself and his nation into the hands of a loving God. What a contrast then when we turn to our reading from Jeremiah's prophecy. In David's psalm we see the early days of the monarchy of Israel established through the line of Judah. In Jeremiah we see that same kingly line coming to its end. By the time Jeremiah was writing, about 600 years BC, Israel had long been divided into a northern kingdom, still called Israel, and a southern kingdom called Judah. Israel had already been conquered by Assyria about 100 years previously. Now Judah was threatened with a similar fate, this time at the hands of Babylon. Decades before, Isaiah had warned them. Now Jeremiah was speaking of the imminence of that judgment. Where was the trustworthy God in whom King David had expressed such confidence? This God seemed bent on vengeance and destruction of the nation, the way a potter might crush and reform a clay pot that was not to his liking. The Lord called Jeremiah to go to a potter's house and witness for himself the way in which a potter would reshape a pot that had become marred in the making, and form it into another, shaping it as seemed best to him. If you've ever worked with clay on a potter's wheel, you will know how quickly the clay mass can defy your shaping, becoming lopsided, or outgrowing its ability to support itself. It has to be knocked back into just a ball of clay, and you have to start again. That is what God was intending to do with Judah. It was not too late if the nation repented and turned from its idolatry and its neglect of the poor. God would relent. He would not inflict disaster upon them. But if they did not heed the warning, he would act against them. He already knew, however, that they would respond, "It's no use. We will continue with our own plans. Each of us will follow the stubbornness of his evil heart." As a result, history testifies that the monarchy was brought to an end, the temple in Jerusalem destroyed, the land ruined, and the people deported to Babylon. Wait a minute, though. Were not these the people from whom the Messiah would descend? Was not our salvation bound up with their survival as a nation? This is where we bring both readings together. The answer to that question is, of course, yes. But then how could God allow his people to be conquered? We have to recall that the God that David revealed to us is trustworthy and all-powerful. Even with his people in exile, in an alien culture far from their homeland, he would find them, reach out to them and save them. We know from our Bible reading and from history itself that the deportation to Babylon lasted for several decades, but eventually the Lord appointed Cyrus the Persian to defeat and occupy Babylon and to release the captive people of Judah, allowing them to return, rebuild their city and their temple, and become worshippers of the Lord with renewed zeal, never again resorting to idolatry. The years of exile had been for their correction. That experience of captivity in Babylon ignited a longing to worship the Lord again in their own land. What seemed harsh treatment when their God handed them over to the Babylonians was in fact an act of love, not only for them, to show them their need of the Lord, but ultimately for us, because we needed our Messiah, who had long been promised as an offspring of the tribe of Judah. Returning to our psalm, we can echo David's words with confidence. Through all the vicissitudes of life, whatever we are facing, we can know that God is with us, hemming us in, laying his hand upon us, reaching for us in the darkest places, so that his hand will guide us, his right hand will hold us fast, and finally the kingdom that he has been shaping and protecting through all human history will dawn on our dark world and bring all suffering to an end.